Hi everyone, this is Keo Motsepe from Dancing with the Stars. I'm joining from the Mental Health Collusion handle today to support their Project One-to-One series, which is basically one needs to talk to someone when they're going through something. I think mental health is very important in our life, and it's something that every person goes through in their life, and I think it's very important to chat and to talk to someone, close friend, a family member, a co-worker, whoever you feel close to. You can share and you can open up to them, and you don't feel judged. I think sometimes we are afraid to talk to someone because we feel judged, or we feel, oh, this person's gonna look at me in a different way. So today also I'm so honored to be joined by Jeremy and Diego. Jeremy Fall is an award-winning restaurateur and a celebrity chef, the only child of a Caribbean, French, Tunisian, and Jewish family. He grew up in the restaurant business and opened 5 successful businesses by the age 27. How amazing is that? And also he hosts a show on Facebook called Beats for Breakfast. When I heard that, I was like, he's making eggs while he's making beats. But anyway, he's making a tasty dish while the singer-songwriter Miguel creates new tunes. So, and Jeremy has a new podcast dinner party that launches this summer. So look out for Jeremy Fall. Amazing. I'm excited for them to come in. So, wow, this is awesome. Also, we have Diego Perez. They're about to join me very soon. So he's a meditator, he's a writer, he's a speaker who is known to his social media audience by his pen name Young Pueblo, which means young people, and reminds him of his Ecuadorian roots. Millions are inspired by his movement from self-love to unconditional love, the reality of self-healing, and the wisdom that comes when we truly work on knowing ourselves. Very important. His latest book, Clarity and Connection, became an immediate New York Times bestseller. So let's bring up Jeremy and Diego. Guys, thank you for joining. I'm excited about this. And you both have pivotal moments in your mental health journeys. And Jeremy, I would love to start with you. Like, what was going on in your life during that time?
I think for me, the biggest thing was, I'm skipping ahead. Like I was born with an anxiety disorder and depression, and I didn't know what it was. Growing up, there was a lot of stigma around that. And especially as a man, I feel like we weren't really allowed to talk about that. Not as much in my household, just in society. You were either allowed to be angry or normal, but there wasn't anything really, I would say, more than that was really allowed, or else it would show weakness. Mm-hmm. So, I didn't really understand what it was until I got older. And once I had realized it, I did everything I could to mask it and focused on my career and doing things that would feed my ego over and over again, just to kind of make up for that, chasing accolades and awards. And then one day I realized that I was living inauthentically and needed to be more open about and doing things that I actually love doing, not that I thought I should be doing. So that was a big pivotal thing. I had always been afraid that medication would ruin my creativity and I'd lose my personality. And then when I started medication, I realized that I never felt more like myself than I ever had. So that was something that really was open. Therapy really helped me figure that out, and psychiatry. So I think it's really about sometimes figuring out, what your formula is. I feel like we have our own formulas. Each person does. And mine was that. I don't think it necessarily applies to everyone, but I think when you end up figuring that out, you really realize who you really are and start feeling like yourself.
True. You're so right. You said something very interesting at the beginning when you said, as men, there's this stereotype thing that we're not allowed to share our feelings and how we feel and what we go through, because it makes us in a way less manly. You know what I mean? And I think personally for me, being a dancer, being a ballroom dancer especially, it taught me so many things in terms of my emotions and how I deal with with other people and how I communicate, how I share my mind and everything. But yes, I get to moments when, especially being in entertainment, I get to moments where it's just a lot, and you're like, who do I talk to? Who do I talk to? Because you don't want to be judged. You don't want someone to look at you and be like, why is he going through stuff like that? You know what I mean? But it's important, and luckily I have people in my life that I can turn around and be like, yo, I'm just thinking like this. This is going on, blah blah, and friends know me. Also, yeah, I think it's very important. So, yeah. And what about you, Diego?
Yes, I mean, similar to the both of you. I think my real struggles were with anxiety and sadness. So I think over time, I realized that I had this inclination towards sadness that I never really dealt with. And as I got older, especially when I was in college, it sort of multiplied into these really nasty habits. And I realized that what was actually happening inside of my mind was that I was trying to run away from my emotions as fast as possible. And to run away from my emotions because it felt like I had no real way to process what was happening inside of me. It ended up leading me to just focusing on pleasure, just like attaining as much pleasure as possible by like partying, drinking, smoking a ton, doing different drugs. And it led me to this point where I just sort of collapsed inside of myself and I hit this rock bottom. And from there, I was able to, start connecting the dots and start seeing that, okay, if lying to myself and not admitting to the fact that I'm, feeling this sorrow, feeling this heaviness inside of me, if that's what took me to this place where I was never admitting, okay, I feel this tension inside of myself, then if lying myself got me here, then honesty is going to help me, pull myself out of this hole that I'm in. So eventually, I did a year of like practicing a lot of radical honesty with myself, just like whenever I would feel a lot of heaviness, whenever I would feel like trying to just like seek something that, to externalize my pain, I would try to sit with myself instead. And a year after that, after practicing a lot of radical honesty, I ended up finding meditation, and meditation just hit me like exactly where I needed. It met my conditioning where in all of those like sort of difficult areas where I needed a lot more equanimity, which was like the biggest gift. I would react so intensely to the anxiety and sadness that I would feel that I would actually make it bigger. So meditation actually helped me decrease the intensity of those reactions, which allowed so much more, like clarity, new perspectives, and a lot of creativity, similar to what Jeremy was talking about that I didn't have access to before because my mind was just too tense. And now, I feel really grateful. And similar to Jeremy, like people have such different emotional history. They have such different conditioning. So what's helping me, evolve and become a better version of myself is going to be different for other people. So each person has to find their own sort of practice, their own method of introspection and finding a way to, get to know themselves and develop more self-love so that they no longer harm themselves or harm others. And to be able to find that, it's really to each their own, but we're really fortunate that there's just an immense amount of tools out there available to us today.
So
yeah, especially now.
Yeah.
right now, especially right now. But Diego, what was like the judgments you put on yourself during this time? Like judging yourself, or in how you want to put it, obviously. But like, what were the judgments that you put on yourself?
The big struggle that I found in my mind was that my parents, they were immigrants from Ecuador. We all immigrated here, and I knew that they worked so hard for us all to be here. So I felt like I didn't have enough space to really be in touch with my emotions. So when I realized that actually I am going to be able to be a better person by allowing myself to feel even the tough moments and not running away from it, that caused a big shift.
Wow. What about you, Jeremy?
I mean, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think, I think it's really something within you. Like I always knew that I needed some level of help, and it was just, starting to have real conversations with people around me, and then realizing that by talking about it, I felt more like myself, and I didn't need to tiptoe around the honesty line, basically. And what was interesting is when Diego and I met, we started talking, and I have felt a lot of, I had felt judgment from people that were, meditators and whatnot, being a medicator, right? And when I met Diego, I was like, all right, this dude's gonna fucking judge me for medicating when he meditates. And then
Listen,
we started, right? We started talking, and I was like, we the first thing he said, he was like, yeah, if that works for you. And I was like, well, if it works for you, like, just do it. And then we just got, like, that's how kind of our friendship started, was because we realized that ultimately, even though the paths are different, it would, the process really to get to that end goal was really all that mattered. It doesn't really matter, like, if you talk to people, like, this is one thing that I always find fascinating, is people are like, well, aren't you afraid that then you're going to be hooked on the meds and you're not going to be able to stop? And I'm like, well, why would I want to stop? It takes like 3 seconds to take a pill. Like, I don't mind doing that for the rest of my life if it makes the 24 hours of my life easier. It seems like a really good return on investment. So there's this weird thing where people are like, yeah, but I'm worried I'm not going to be able to stop. And I'm like, why would you? Like, if something helps you, it's like, why would you stop eating healthy? Why would you stop, if exercising is your thing? Why would you stop doing that? Why would you stop doing the things that actually help you? I've never understood, why there's such a stigma around that. Like meditation, like it's something that for me, with the way my brain works, like, I can't sit still in general. If you're asking me to, like, close my eyes and breathe or like that, my anxiety is actually gonna get worse. So ironically, it just doesn't work for me, but I have nothing against it. Like, I think whatever works for you works for you. And it's something that I would try again in the future. And maybe now that I am on medication, I should try it again, because I feel like maybe now I'm in a better space in terms of my anxiety levels being regulated, where I could actually try that and maybe it works for me. And it does, because I do think that it's an ever evolving thing. It's not like a one, it's going to be a struggle for the rest of your life. It's not like, even when you find the solution, you got to still harness it and keep the solution going and grow from it, right? It's not, it's going to always evolve. So, and it's all of our own journeys, right? So ultimately, if this works for me today, maybe in 10 years from now, maybe I do just meditate, or maybe it's a combination or both, or whatever it is. Maybe I figure something else out, a passion of mine that helps me cope with it. But I think ultimately it's to each person, it's to each their own.
You both said it in both your answers, and it's you go back to it, but like, and my head, it goes, everything starts with you. Like, literally everything starts with you. Before you figure out for yourself, who are you, what you want, and before you even, because I feel like every person, as soon as you start talking to someone, right, you go, hey, I'm going through this and this and this and this and this. They'll give you an answer based on however it came to them, right? But if you for yourself, you don't know who you are as a person, and you don't know your inner self. When I say yourself, meaning like your inner self, like what makes Jeremy, what makes Diego, what makes Keo, right? But like the inner self of you, knowing where you're going, what you want in your life, and stuff like that, and you're going through moments. If someone gives you an advice, there's 50% chance you will take it, and there's 50% you might not take it, because there's gonna be that thing in your head that, no, I don't want to take medicine to help me because it helped you. Maybe something else. Me, I believe that working out is gonna help me. You know what I mean? So you both said it so well in your own words, obviously. But like, I feel like everything starts with you, and I am so hot in here, and I'm glowing. Sorry.
I wanted to say
that turtleneck, bro. You gotta lose the turtleneck.
I know. I rip it off. I'm like, why did I do this?
I wanted to say real quick that it's funny because I think we live in such a special moment, right? One of the effects from living in a globalized world is that now that we are more closely united, the level of accessibility has gone through the roof, and we can still go deeper into accessibility and make things much more accessible, especially around therapy and psychiatry, even around meditation. We can make things more accessible. But the reality is that if you look at it from like 20, 30, 40 years ago, the accessibility has gone through the roof. So that makes a special situation where a lot of people who've been, you know, who have either felt a lot of trauma in the past, have gone through very intense things, they're more than ever before are looking for pathways to build a better life for themselves. And I think a lot of that stigma just kind of has to fall away to the past, because whether if it's, you know, if you need medication or you need to try some sort of meditation, or you need to find a therapist, or you need to even do something like journaling or figuring out some way to get in touch with yourself and develop a sense of introspection so that you can, you know, no longer just fall to the old reactions in a way where you're constantly repeating the past anymore, but in a way where you can actually just take in the present moment, be there, and just allow yourself to try something different. But I'm pretty excited to even be having this conversation, because, you know, even like when I remember when I first started meditating, I got really excited about meditation, but quickly I came to understand that, right, this isn't necessarily for everyone. And I've even had family members who've had great success with therapy, family members who've had a lot of success with psychiatry. And ultimately what matters at the end of the day is, are they happier? Do they feel freer in their minds? Are they making better decisions for themselves? And are they able to like live their goals that they really want to come together? So if anybody can find a way to take their own, you know, steps forward, then brilliant, go for it.
And Diego, I think one of the things too is like we're prone to, just as humans, becoming almost elitist in our own approach, where something works for us, we think it works for everyone else, and it's like such a big battle to overcome, that when you've got it, you want to help others. And we're over here trying to tell people like meditate, whatever it is that worked for us, assuming that's going to work for everyone else. But ultimately, it's, you know, we have to also remember that our methods, just because they work for us and we're trying to teach other people, that it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work for them, and letting them also figure it out.
You know, it's funny because like we have to be careful with the insidiousness of the ego, right? Because that superiority complex is deep, like it runs deep. So as soon as you find something that works for you, people get so excited, and then it's great, you know, tell your friends, let people know. But at the end of the day, we have to give people space to, like, you know, go at their own pace, find their own tools, find their own practices. And, you know, the advice that I give people is like a few things. Like, one, you want to find something that's challenging and not overwhelming, like something that really meets you where you're at, something that is, you know, challenging enough that will make you stronger, but something that's not overwhelming, especially if you had a lot of severe trauma in the past. It's not going to bring too many things up at once, and then you won't be able to work, and you'll actually run away from the inner work. And then the other side of that is like, while you're searching and looking and trying for different things, like you have to trust your intuition and see what connects. Like, what am I going to give time to? Like, you know, when I found Vipassana meditation, I was like, it just clicked, and I was like, this is my thing. I'm going to try this. I'm going to put energy into it. And like you said, like the return on the investment was so big that I was like, okay, you know, I got to keep going.
And I feel like you're writing too, like, you know, I feel like for you as well, as a form of therapy, right? When all the things that you write about. I mean, when I read one of your captions on Instagram, or you know, whatever your photos on Instagram, I feel like there's such a high level of authenticity in what you're saying, that I'm like, this is something that was felt. It's not something that was just said out of like pure knowledge. Like, this is like, you can tell that you are speaking from like a place that's very knowledgeable and deep, and like from emotional understanding. You know what I mean? I think that's why people really resonate and connect with you, is because like when you read those words, like it feels real. It doesn't feel like, you know, some like meme quote on Tumblr that you pulled and just like threw on Instagram.
That's funny. Yeah, man, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's funny because I think it's nothing that's like, you know, it's something that everybody has access to. And what I find with a lot of my friends who are taking their inner work seriously, whether they meditate or not, what they find is that, you know, like whether they're a dancer, whether they cook, whether they, you know, write, like their ability to decrease the tension in their mind allows for more of their like raw human nature creativity to just flow outward, and they'll imbue that creativity in whatever it is that they enjoy creating. And it's interesting because when you think about it and you sort of do that, like, you know, if you think about it for a little longer and you start seeing, okay, what happens to a world where a lot of people more than ever before are doing their mental health work, and they're taking it seriously, and they're not only finding time to rest, but they're finding time to grow, and they're finding time to just, you know, clean their perspective so it's no longer driven by the past. You'll actually start seeing that creativity will, you know, spread in their inner circle, and they're also have more love, but they're going to be able to look at old problems and come up with new solutions. So I'm quite excited to see what this mental health movement is doing around the world and what it's going to look like 20 years from now, when a lot more people, because like, think about it, if you have a lot of self-love and if you know yourself better than before, then you're going to be much less likely to cause other people intentional or unintentional harm, because self-awareness makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question, and do you think culture, like where you're from, and has an influence into like your mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's had a big influence. I know that, especially like I come from an Ecuadorian background, so I always think in terms of community. And it's interesting because like we're such a tight unit in Ecuador, and like I was born in Ecuador too. I came to the United States when I was about like 4.5 years old with my family when they brought me over here, and we, you know, we remained as a unit, but it was here in like the United States where we learned like individualism and atomization, and, you know, being like a smaller unit as opposed to constantly being in community. So when I think about that in terms of mental health, I think that's something that we need to balance out, because at the end of the day, you are an individual and you have your own mental conditioning that you need to deal with and heal. But at the same time, like, you know, you're also part of a community. You also are allowed to lean on others for support, but being able to balance the two just feels pretty critical.
What about you, Jeremy?
I look, I think it's a huge part of it. I mean, you see what happens, like if you see what happened with like BLM, if you see what happened with, you know, what's happening right now. I mean, you know, it's the first time I think I've lived in Los Angeles where I have friends of mine that are messaging me being like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you know, everything that's going on with Israel and Palestine right now, like we're having hate crimes against Jewish people in Los Angeles, where, like, I mean, hating Jews in Los Angeles is like hating the sun. Like, it's like there's so many of us here, like, you know what I mean? So it's when you see those things, I mean, you know, there's studies about why like Jewish people are more prone to anxiety and things like that. It's because like during the Holocaust, a lot of them had this reflex having to look behind their backs constantly because of fear of Nazis. And when you think about that, that kind of thing can actually have an impact on your DNA and become genetic based off of experience. I mean, when you look at different like minorities and different parts of the world that suffer more, like I definitely think that there's a cultural impact there. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it is something that is ingrained in you. It is also the way you grow up, like growing up in fear, growing up in, you know, things are depressing. It's like when people say, you know, I'm watching a show or movie and I like felt really down the next day. If you amplify that with your environment times a million, that is going to absolutely affect your mental health. And I think that it'll actually shift something in, you know, the way you're made, and it's something that you can transmit to other generations for sure. You know, I mean, look, we're both, the three of us are all sons of immigrants, like, you know, whatever it is, like we are minorities by nature. So, and three men, right? Which is funny, like interesting talk about mental health. Like, could we have done this 10 years ago? I don't think so. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way this would have happened I would have been way embarrassed to talk about this 10 years ago.
Yeah, because life is different now. You know, I think that's what I said at the beginning. It's like men have the ability to just share the emotions and actually, you know, like you said, if you focus on yourself and you know who you are, then other people won't get hurt around you. You know, because then people won't get harmed around you. You know, and I agree with that. I think culturally, I just had a conversation with a friend the other day, and it's like, it's so interesting where I'm from, South Africa. We have a word in South Africa, like it's one of the biggest words. It's called Ubuntu. Ubuntu means you are because we all are. Mm. And coming from South Africa and the love and like growing up with the like, we all together, we there for each other, we friends or families or your neighbor's neighbor, you know, and it's like, I come to say, I don't even know my neighbor. Like, I didn't grow up like that, you know. I grew up knowing my neighbors next door, or like, you know, that's how I grew up. Because if I'm not home, like that comes up, if I'm not home, I'm like, hey, Jeremy, I'm out of town for a little bit. Just make sure that everything around the house is it's all good. That's the culture. That's the culture. Where here you are on your own. You know what I mean? There's people are scared to open up because we've seen people use things of other people to do whatever they want to do. You know what I mean? Like they'll use your hurt to eat in a sense. But both of you, like, what was like when was the time when you knew that you're on the right track? Like, when was that?
That's a good question, man.
I actually know that answer, which is interesting. I thought about this recently. There was something that was bothering me. That was just like, it was a couple of people that weren't even close friends. They were like upset at me, and I had this like fear of like disappointing people, and it's part of my imposter syndrome too. Just like always, like making people like sad and disappointed and stuff. And it's just I always wanted the opposite, make people happy, and being Jewish obviously makes it worse. But I was in the shower, and I was literally thinking about the same thing that really made me super down like a week before. And I was in the shower, and I was like, wow, I really give no shits about this issue anymore. And it was a week later. And that's when I knew my medication started to kick in. I did different medications for about 3 months before they started working. And people kept talking about this like moment where like it clicks. And I was just like, I started to not believe it, but I was like, I'm just going to keep trying. I'm going to keep trying therapy, psychiatry, everything. And then one day it just clicked and life was easier. And it was just this one thing where I started thinking, and like, when I say like the world was different, like I got in my car and it was just like, everything was different. Like every time, like I would drive before, like, and I'd be at a green light, I'd be freaking out that the light would turn yellow and not know what I would do. Or if an elevator door opened and there'd be someone on the other side, I would be afraid that I wouldn't know how to deal with it and not know what to do. That was over. Everything was easier. The lights turned green, didn't think about it, and still to this day, it's like that. I'm not cured of anxiety, and I hope I never do, because it's part of who we are, and I do think that it's necessary to a certain extent, especially with the types of careers that we have. But ultimately, like, the way I kind of describe it now is, before, it used to be, let's say something bothering, I would be like, oh, this is bothering me, and keep going on a spiral. And now it kind of just fades in the wind a little bit. And it's just kind of like goes away. I still get the thought, but the spiral is controlled. And I think that that's really where the beauty is, and the key of it is like controlling that spiral that keeps us going. Because if you look at anxiety or depression, usually it's like, it's a seed, right, that's planted, and then it's the growth is what continues to go. That's what really affects us. It's not usually the initial thought. It's the result of that and how it continues, right? So if you manage to control that second part, I think that's where like the beauty is. It's about figuring out how to not get it to become worse, right? And how to not spiral. It's not about trying to remove it completely, because I think a lot of people numb themselves with like drugs or whatever it is, where they're like, cool, like now I'm a vegetable and I can't think anymore. That's not the way to do it, right? Because that's the way where you push it. It's going to keep coming back to you. They're like, these emotions, they're like clouds. They have to pass through, and you have to learn how to deal with them. But it's about figuring out how to make them to pass through and not stop inside you.
Dude,
I should be the poet, dude. You should make me the poet. What is this? I'm like, I hang out.
That was beautiful, man.
And now I'm like talking about clouds.
I was literally next to you, and I was just like, you took me there.
Yeah, I was totally feeling that, man. And
I was just, yes.
On a similar note, I think for me personally, it's I had a few moments where I noticed that my mind felt lighter, like where I would leave a meditation retreat and I could feel that the like tension in my mind was just no longer as heavy as it was before. And I remember even like to the point where I felt like I could even perceive more. Like I was able to like look at a tree and able to appreciate it a lot more, or I could look at the ground and just like notice more rocks than I noticed before. And being able to not be so mentally busy and being driven by narratives of like, some form of tension or another, some form of anxiety, and just letting them pass. And I feel like that was the big shift, like similar to what you were saying, Jeremy, was feeling like, okay, here's anxiety, here's sadness, here's, you know, jealousy, envy, you know, whatever you could have felt. But it didn't feel like it was mine anymore. It felt like something that was passing through, that was here momentarily, and that was going to change eventually. And being able to feel whatever heaviness was there without throwing more fire on top of it. And that's something that I noticed was like, it's one thing to feel anxiety, but then how quickly do we make that anxiety worse by just reacting to it so very intensely and allowing it to just balloon up into something way bigger than it was initially. And I think that was just the you know, the big moment where it was like, okay, I do feel sadness right now. You know, today is a tough day, but I'm going to allow myself to just walk peacefully through the day. I'm not going to suppress what I'm feeling. I'm just going to keep feeling it. But at the same time, I'm going to be aware that, okay, this is momentary. So like tomorrow is not necessarily going to be the same. The next day could also be different. So having that understanding that like, okay, I feel this emotion right now, but it's also impermanent has been the biggest shift. And just owning like, yeah, I don't feel good right now. Fantastic. I'm just going to keep living my day, and I'm going to be really gentle towards myself, and I'm going to make sure to be gentle with those people around me so that I don't allow my tension to become a projection and then cause some unintentional conflict that just doesn't need to happen.
Wow, you both are amazing.
You should see when we hang out.
No. I already saw yesterday.
It's all it is. It's all. This is the way we talk all the time.
But also, like during this times in your lives, right? I feel like you learn so many things about yourself. You learn your superpowers. So you learn that, okay, I'm good at that. That's something that I'm not doing that. Have you guys learned like what's your superpower during this journey? Like
you know, I think honestly, my superpower is embracing change. That has been like the biggest, like if you were to ask me like, what is it that I'm learning in this life? I'm learning impermanence. I'm learning change. I'm learning that change is happening all the time. It's happening at the atomic level, at the physical level, you know, at the mental level. It's just everything is in constant motion. And when you start fighting that motion, when you want to stand still as opposed to moving with the ocean of change, then you're going to find a lot of struggle. So for me, like change is everything, because the moment that you realize like, okay, even if I live for 100 years, that's still like, that's very short, especially when you take it to like cosmological timescales. 100 years is nothing. But if I do realize like, okay, I have this opportunity to live, let me do my best to live well. Let me be present in the moments that are in front of me and try not to fall into those types of situations where you're in the middle of a beautiful moment and all you're thinking about is what's missing. You know, so those things right there can put such a damper on life that the moment that you realize, okay, if everything's constantly changing, now let me just enjoy what's happening in front of me and let me be here, as opposed to being lost in the past in my mind or being caught up with what's going to happen next.
Wow. What about you, Jeremy?
Honestly, I think for me, it's repositioning just about anything. So what I learned was, you know, I have anxiety, so it's something I have to live with. Instead of trying to go up against it, how do I grow with it, right? So it's repositioning it as a strength. I realized that in my creativity, in my career in general, I've managed to use it as a propeller and something that like pushes me forward. So it's something that I go against. So, for example, you know, to apply it, like let's say, you know, we're opening a restaurant, for example. When I opened one of my restaurants, I was able to figure out every single part of the experience. When I'd have a customer come in, say a woman would come in, how they would sit, if they turned a certain way, if their knees would hit, you know, the back of the bar, if there was purse hooks under there, where they were exactly, if they turned this way, what they would look at. Like I was able to manage a million things at once because I would think of every possible outcome. That's what anxiety does, right? It's constantly thinking about, you know, I think 5 cars forward. If I'm driving, I'm not thinking about the car in front of me. It's 5 cars ahead of me. And that's how you prevent an accident, right? So when I realized that there was a way to really kind of see things through a bigger view, that's why I figured out how to harness it. It's removing that spiral that I was talking about, but still keeping that original idea, the original thought that hits you, and kind of shifting it more towards what I'm doing and positioning it as fuel more so than anything. And it's helped me. You know, like when I have a million things to do, I have teams to manage or whatever it is, like I'm thinking about what everyone has to do, what everything that has to be done. and my brain's not going to stop. I mean, that's anxiety, but I'm getting things done. So as long as that doesn't become detrimental to my health, I think it's okay. I think it's healthy to a certain extent. If I was acting like a zombie all day, like I wouldn't get anything done. So there is and I think that to me is that superpower that I talk about. It's like, you know, using it as like jet fuel instead of something that's going to like make me crash into a wall.
100%. 100%. Yeah, I think, I don't know if that's my superpower, but I found a way, you know, during anything that I do in my life, right? Whether good or bad. And my mom always told me that. She goes, embrace everything that you go through.
Mm.
And for when I was traveling, dancing, whatever, I couldn't understand what she meant by that. She always told me that, like, I'll go through something, she'll be like, embrace it, embrace it. And I'm like, Mama, what are you talking about? I don't know what it means. But growing up and understanding, it's like you go through something, right? And it didn't work out how you wanted to work out. You embrace that because it makes you stronger. It's gonna make you. It's gonna open so many different outlook and different like doors for yourself because you embracing your faults, you embracing your mistake, you embracing what you've been through, regardless of good or bad. You know how as much as I embrace winning or you know a job or this like this, whatever I go through, either whatever in my life, bad or good, I embrace that because then it makes it. Sometimes I like embrace something. I'm like, yeah, no, that didn't go well, but you know what? It's life. And I move on, but I don't sit on it. I'm like, what happened? Like, you know what I mean? I just go, I gave it 1,000%. It didn't work out. Awesome, great. Next, let's move on. You know what I mean? So it's yeah, it's like that self-acceptance and that yeah, understanding you and embracing everything. If I had to, let me just fix my makeup quickly. Sorry. If you had to look back, right? If you had to look at your younger self, what would you say right now at this moment?
Mm.
Looking back,
if you had your younger self right now, what would you say to your younger self right now?
oh, how young are we talking? I guess is the
Okay, so technical, my Jeremy.
it makes a big difference because it depends on what part of my life I was either a massive shit show or not. So it just depends on when that was.
Let's go rough. The shit show self of you.
It's like 2 weeks ago. No, I mean, I think that if I were to look now, I think I needed every part of the puzzle to get here, right? So I don't think I could have cut any corners. I don't think I could have skipped anything. I needed to feel everything and be at every part of my life. So I think even if I could talk to my younger self, I would be like, just live through it. It's like those clouds I was talking about. Just let yourself experience these things because that's just how you're going to get here. There's no other way to do it. I think, like I said, it's all unique to our own journeys. I don't think I would have cut any corners, as painful as it was for a lot of those years. Ultimately, it's something that I think was necessary. And when I look back, when I talk to people about things, like when I talk about all those examples about the lights and the elevators and stuff, it's like those things now are so interesting to me. Like I still think about it and I really appreciate little things like that. Like an elevator door opening. I'm like, I was getting my hair cut a few days ago, elevator door open, and I was like, still got it. Just walked out, no anxiety, no fear about if even someone's there. I'm fine now. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to do. Like all these little things that people don't realize about how crippling to your life it can be. All those things now I'm so much more appreciative of every single, part of the day. Like the smallest, most ridiculous things that may seem to some people are like massive for me. And all of those to me are victories. And like the more victories I think you have in your day, that really helps, fuel you, towards happiness more and more every day.
Yeah, it was funny. I was taking a moment to write something down. But
Of course you were just writing a poem, just writing a poem in the middle of the stream. I'm like thinking about what I'm gonna eat for dinner. You're just like, hold on,
yeah, I'm gonna tweet it later and see what happens. But I was thinking if I really had a chance, I would say pleasure is not going to heal your pain, but self-awareness will. And that's like I feel like when I was younger, especially when I was like 18, 19, 20, I got caught in this like hamster wheel of seeking pleasure as a way to just try to solve everything. And I thought it was the only way to like, eradicate this pain inside me, but all it did was just suppress it and keep building it, and the fire just kept growing and growing. So if I did, have that opportunity to help cut that suffering, you really want to build self-awareness. You want to have an understanding of the way you're reacting to your everyday moments. You want to be able to just accept yourself, like Keo, like what you were saying earlier, like being able to embrace yourself in whatever situation that you're in. Like that's critical, because you're not going to change your life without first accepting where you are. But if I really had that opportunity, yeah, man, just understanding that pleasure is not going to heal you, but self-awareness will, then maybe I would have gotten started early. But at the same time, life was what it was, and I'm grateful that I'm still here, but I think definitely it would have helped alleviate a little bit of the suffering earlier.
That whole concept of pleasure in different scenarios is really interesting, because like is it a pleasure as an escape, or is it as a pleasure of living in the moment, right? And when it's a pleasure to escape, that's when the problem is. When it's the pleasure of the present, that's when it's a real pleasure.
And I think it's really critical, right? Because like with any piece of advice or anything you might read on the internet, or from anyone that you take seriously, like it's all with a grain of salt. Like there has to be balance, because you can take any particular idea, push it to an extreme, and it becomes quite unhealthy. So like similarly, I'm not talking about like devoiding pleasure from your life, right? You're not a monk, I'm not a monk. We're householders, we're living our lives, we're living everyday lives. So it's important to realize that like if you get addicted to pleasure, if you can not even like addicted to a particular thing, but like if you get caught in that hamster wheel, then be able to notice that so you can pull yourself off of that. So it's it's just so critical to be able to realize what's good advice for you, and then balance that out so that you don't actually push it into becoming bad advice.
I would like to intro an amazing Dr. Luana Marques. Now she's an professor at Harvard and president of Anxiety of America. She also founded an organization called Community Pride, bringing mental health resources to community of color. All right, I'm gonna add her right now.
Hi guys.
Hey, that's just like
Yay!
that's just like 4 brown kids with a dream just on this stream. Look at us.
Listen, I have to start by just saying how humbled I am, right? I grew up in Brazil, where we're told not to talk about this, that, mental health is stigma. And the 3 of you just spend an hour talking about the reality, the vulnerability, and then your journey. And I can't thank you enough. I felt my brain rewiring and really feeling so empowered. And I could see in the comments, like all of us were feeling the connection, the excitement. And I want to drive home 3 things. Like for me, what is the superpower? What's the juice here? The first one I think you guys are saying that I love is this idea that everyone has their own recipe, right? And then your recipe is yours. I heard Jeremy talk about this idea of repositioning, which I really think about sort of like approach and not avoid, and in really changing the dance with anxiety. And then Diego talking about this idea of embracing change. I remember my grandmother, Diego, how you grew up in South America, you get this. My grandmother used to say, you need to be the water, not the rock. Right? And this idea to me really always made me think of like, I have to go with it. I don't want to find it. And Keo, this idea of embracing and starting with you within your culture had such connection, right? Social support in your culture buffers mental health. So like your superpowers are incredible. So that's the first piece. Like your own recipes are amazing. The second one, which I really want all of us to really change, mental health is brain health. You guys talked about this, right? We take I think it was you, Jeremy, says it pop a pill for a headache. Well, I think both Jeremy and Diego talked about rewiring their brain through science. Medication changed the brain. Meditation changed the brain, Right, we go back to that recipe, but we actually know that both in randomized trials are actually working the same network of the brain. So you just need to rewire your brain, right? I really think it's cool. And the last thing that and then I will throw it back to you guys, but I really saw in the conversation, and neuroscience teaches us what is helpful in terms of protecting our brain when we have anxiety, depression, flexibility, being able to see the world in different ways. In this conversation, you guys talked about changing the relationship with anxiety and depression, right? Being able to not spin with it, spiral with it, but be able to capitalize. I think Jeremy said propel. I like this idea. I think it's about living a life that is comfortably uncomfortable and yet flexible, being the water, not the rock. And so I can't thank you guys enough. I'm dying to hear questions and talk about it, but you guys are amazing.
Oh, thank you. Coming from
Yeah,
you, it's
that
very,
means a
very
lot
kind.
from
Because
you.
like, you started talking about, I was like, that doesn't sound like anything that I said, but I'm glad that yours is very much more eloquent than the way I speak. So thank you for that. You know, before the pandemic, we're in such a time in the world where we were just so much distraction. And then all of a sudden, I'm just like, second pandemic, I'm like, why do I need to call my mother? You know, I need to call this person, like this friend that lives in Paris that I haven't talked to in years. Why I haven't talked to him in years? Because I didn't have the time. How did I not have, half an hour over 5 years to talk to this person? And so for me, I really saw an acceleration in terms of like wanting to take care of like my mental health and really work on it, and have like reflect, right, with like myself and really start thinking about how to be better. And like, I think when you're really stripped away from all these frivolous things, and especially in like the line of work that I'm in, it's like events and like all these things and press and stuff. It's like when those things go away and like your self-worth is really defined by like actually who you are and not the social currency of awards and press and TV and whatever it is, like having that, investing in that personal social currency is where it starts to get really important. And that's when I was like, wow, I have to really focus on this and really start opening up and really, grow myself versus what I think of myself, right?
That's absolutely true. It's funny. You said it's gonna sound like we talked before, but we really didn't. So for everybody's watching, but Jeremy did something beautiful here. So I, through the pandemic, I thought a lot about pacing, and I actually use an acronym PAC, so PACE, because I felt like we started the pandemic and we're all thrown in this sort of like sprint, right? The world changed, but then it became a marathon, right? And then I think Jeremy, you just talked about this idea that you had moment to pause. And so like, what does it look to pace your mental health? Like my recipe for myself is like, first you need to pulse your mental health, check in, create space to understand what's going on there, right? Once you sort of create that pause and through pulsing it, then you need to anchor, drop that anchor. We talked about meditation, cooking, right? I can imagine that, and dancing. Those are the ways to anchor right now. Then we have to jumpstart our batteries, charge up. Right, Jeremy just talked about this. Once you sort of pause, like how do we recharge? And then that last one, I think, Keo, you did beautiful talking about this, establishing connection. Right? So if you're able to like press a pause, anchor, charge up, really give your brain some energy, and then connect with others, then you set your pace, your superpower, right? And I think you guys are doing that really beautifully here.
Well, thank you. Those were very kind words.
What are the tools, like if someone's going through a crisis, like what are the tools that you can give they're going through a crisis?
Here, I think pace, the idea of sort of pausing, anchor, charging up, and establishing connection helps. But if you're really in the middle of a crisis, you guys actually described something that we talk a lot in cognitive behavior therapy, which is a science type of therapy, which is the idea that thoughts are not facts. In crisis, we believe everything that's going on, and then those thoughts lead to strong emotions. So the same way that thoughts are not facts, when you're in the middle of a crisis, emotions are valid. What you're feeling is true, but they're not reliable. They are actually not leading you towards something good. And then often we want to shut down. So the trick is to approach, not avoid. And I think Diego did beautiful in a way that you can tolerate it. So if you're in a crisis, take one little bite at a time, because if you go all in, you're completely uncomfortable, you can't do it. If you're completely comfortable, there's no change.
I love that.
That's amazing.
Not avoid.
That is really cool.
Approach, not avoid.
I love that.
One of the things I also, and that I've like kind of developed is like when anxiety hits me, I always think if it's like neurotic anxiety, like in the moment, or if it's like deeper rooted. And if it's deeper rooted, it's usually something that's probably, more like meaningful, I would say, versus reactional. And I've kind of separated those two, and I've almost quantified my anxiety as something separate. So it's like, it's like when it's like cooling off. If someone slaps you, like you're immediately like, it's reactional to be mad or whatever it is. If you hear something, if you get insulted, versus like something that's more in depth. And then I've managed to kind of separate the two and deal with them differently. If it's like my neurosis, my reactionary thought process and anxiety, I'm kind of like, okay, let's just like let this one pass. Let's see how you feel about it. And like I have this whole thing, this system now where I'm like, will this problem still be something I think about in 5 years? And if it's not, it's probably not that important. Like you lose someone, obviously all these things, like those are things you think about forever. But if it's, I'm late to a meeting or whatever it is, like I'm not gonna remember this in 5 years. And that's how I quantify like the level of importance, right? For these things that used to affect me. I'm like, it's managed to help me figure out like what to focus on and what not to focus on.
Yeah. Anxiety is really not the enemy, right? I think about anxiety as I think about our pain receptors. If you touch a hot stove, you better have pain receptors. It signals something to us, right? The question is, what do you do with it? I actually, when I think about anxiety, I'm like, okay, what's going on? I bring curiosity to the process to sort of think, is it something I'm saying to myself, or is it that I'm avoiding something? But I think what you said there, Jeremy, is it's like accessing a pause button. When we feel anxious, we all want to run away. I think Diego talked about this idea of like running away from emotions. Let's run away. That's what culture tells us to do. But actually, you have a choice. You could actually pause for a second and go, wait a minute, do I have to buy into this? And that.
Yeah, there's one thing that I've been trying to really hold myself to, and one thing that I've been, just from observing my own mind, it becomes really clear that whenever there's a moment of difficulty, I can't trust my immediate reaction. My immediate reaction will just be something that is sort of driven by whatever's happened in the past. So whether it's just like this large spark of fear or wanting to run away again, or just doing some sort of, kind of like replaying some old behavior that really doesn't lead to anywhere. So sort of, just like what we've been saying here, like my best friend is the pause. Like as soon as I can pause and just allow myself to just chill for a bit, and I'll let myself feel whatever emotion has come up to the surface in that moment, and taking that time to really see like, okay, now I see my immediate reaction, which reminds me of my past self, but how do I authentically want to show up now? Because that's one thing that I've found over and over, is that first reaction, it doesn't feel too authentic. It just feels like I'm hitting the replay button. I'm just doing what happened in the past. But what feels authentic is like, okay, this is difficult right now, but this is the way that I intentionally want to show up. And that feels like, a big shift.
Yeah, so you're talking about two things that, psychologists have terms for everything, but let me make it very simple. Sometimes when we're uncomfortable, we want to do emotion-driven behavior. You want to just drive it. First is what really is helpful for us is just value-driven behavior, right? And what you're saying is you're actually, when the emotions hit, is that amygdala, that old part of the brain, and it wants to act. And you're saying, well, I can pause, and then I can use my thinking by my prefrontal cortex to then anchor. I heard on values a little bit, and what matters, how to change, not to listen to the narrative. So you're practicing science every day. This is super cool.
Awesome.
Without knowing it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just like, it's interesting.
This is awesome.
I think like I learned a lot of these things, and sometimes I tell like my therapist or like my psychiatrist, and they're like, oh, these are actual like principles. I think I've like discovered something. It's something that they've been like teaching for like years, and I was just like, I came up with this process, and like, yeah, this is what it's called. And I'm like, okay, great. I thought I had invented something, but it's like, it's interesting how you discover like instinctual things, right? It's interesting.
I can tell you, Jeremy, I learned cognitive behavior therapy from my grandmother when I was 16. When I got to graduate school and I got the terms, I was like, oh, I knew that stuff. When she made me go to the mall and talk to strangers when I wanted to go home, and I talked to that cool guy, Well, that's called exposure therapy. So I do think the knowledge is within us.
There was one question that I just saw, and there was somebody just asking what style of meditation I do, and I do Vipassana meditation, and I'll write in the chat the website that you can access it from.
Amazing.
What is it? What is it called?
It's called Vipassana.
Oh, I didn't know that. Actually, I didn't know that. You did tell me that. I remember now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's an old style that comes from Myanmar, taught by Esen Goenka, and there's a lot of different Vipassana styles out there, but that's the particular one that I do. And it's at dhamma.org, DHAMMA.org. You can find more information about it.
I'm gonna try that with you one day. I don't know.
Dude, let's do it. It's hard, but it's massive results.
Well, thanks for the invitation, by the way. So it's all good. Hey, lastly, since it's a part of the one-to-one series, is there someone in your life who showed up for you during this times that made a difference? And if they did, what did they do? You'd love to share. I will start that. And I lost my mom this year in January, and I went through a very rough moments where I couldn't even go home. So that kind of messed with my head. And one of my good friends, a dancer also, he's been my friend since, I've been on the show. And I think it was not like a moment where he said something to me or he did something to make me feel better. It was that knowing in my head that he's always there for me, regardless of judgment, without any pointing fingers, just knowing that he's always there. Like that gave me comfort. So that's what happened. So Jeremy, what about you?
Well, it's interesting. So when I started medication therapy I started about a year ago, and it was difficult for me to talk to my family about it. And I ended up speaking to my mother about it and realized that my entire family is medicated. So it was actually a really nice thing, ironically, to be like, oh, so we're actually all in the same boat. And that was actually a nice thing that made it feel more, acceptable to a certain extent. I think we seek some sort of validation from our families and our friends, right? So I had gone pretty much every form of that except from my actual family. I realized that I'm the third generation of being medicated. So I was like, okay, well, clearly it's in my blood. So I was meant to do this anyway.
For me, I think, honestly, it's been, my wife, she's always coming through in the clutch. She's a serious meditator too. And we kind of just lift each other up through all of this. And especially during the pandemic, and Keo, I'm so sorry for the loss of your mother. I feel like, that's just such a heavy thing to go through. So, I'm feeling so much love for you, man. And similarly, in the pandemic, it's been a tough time. I lost 2 uncles and an aunt, and it's been serious, and in Ecuador, the pandemic has been devastating, but it's a very small country, so we don't get that much news coverage. But I think riding all these ups and downs with my wife and just having that pretty active support that we give each other has made a massive difference.
Awesome. Dr. Luana.
Sure. No, I've been thinking about it here too. For me, there's certainly my husband shows up a lot, but I was thinking that moment of that you really need somebody. And for me, it was many years ago when my life was falling apart. And I remember waking up, everything was upside down. And my mom just called and said, listen, I'm on the first plane. I'll be there. And that thing of not asking questions, right? Yeah. Just sort of showing up. I think that's what this is about. I think that's what I hear you guys doing, is just showing up for somebody and being there when they need the most without questions asked. And that really can be helpful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining this whole conversation today. This is very, for me, I would say motivational, and also so many things about this. And I feel like I really know, I'm gonna hang out with you guys tomorrow, be friends. You know what I mean? I think it takes a lot from a person to be vulnerable, to show themselves, and I hope helped a lot of people today watching. So Thank you guys for tuning in, and you guys for sharing your story.
Of
So
course, thank you. Thanks for
Yeah,
having
thank you.
me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.